How do you prepare for a wedding when your instincts whisper it's a trap? I was supposed to be the groom, but something didn't add up. The way she smiled. The way she disappeared. The way money started vanishing like smoke in a storm. The suit was tailored, the guest list confirmed, and the invitations embossed with gold leaf. Everything about this wedding screamed legacy, the kind my grandfather had spent a lifetime building. I was set to inherit his empire, his name, his expectations. And now, supposedly, his blessing for this marriage. But the blessing came with a warning: before you trust, test the foundation. Weak beams don't hold up palaces. Her name was Julia. On the surface, she was elegance wrapped in silk, soft voice, careful manners, the type who spoke just loud enough to be noticed, but never enough to provoke. My grandfather had liked her, or so I thought. But after his death, I found his final note in the corner of his study, short, cryptic, and handwritten in his deliberate scrawl. You're sharp, boy. But not when you're in love. Check the passages. Trust no one, not even yourself. At first, I brushed it off as the ramblings of an old man. But then, she started vanishing. Not literally, no, Julia was too careful for that. But she'd slip out in the mornings and return with vague excuses. Her texts grew shorter. Her eyes, less direct. And the money. First it was small, easily missed, a few thousand here, a misfiled account there. Then it was larger. A whole wire transfer to an unknown entity. She claimed it was for wedding suppliers. I wanted to believe her. But I didn't. Which is why I called him my godfather. The head of Westbridge Medical. Dr. Elliot Grant. Loyal to my grandfather. Loyal to me. We met in his office, heavy oak bookshelves, certificates lined the walls like armor. I explained everything, the doubt, the money, the whispering phone calls Julia made when she thought I was asleep. He didn't flinch. Just poured us both a whiskey and said, "Your grandfather knew she wasn't what she pretended to be. He just hoped you'd find out before it cost you everything." Then he offered the plan. A coma. Not real, of course, but real enough to fool her. A full medical setup. Machines that beep. 4 drips. A lockdown clinic room in a discreet wing of the hospital. Cameras. Controlled access. My body, wired and motionless, in a medically simulated coma. It's not about revenge, Dr. Grant told me. It's about truth. You're too valuable to play games with. I agreed. The next morning, Julia was told I'd collapsed from a cerebral aneurysm. She rushed in. She wept, convincingly, I'll give her that. She clutched my lifeless hand, kissed my cheek, and whispered that she loved me. And then she waited until the nurse left. Pulled out her phone. Spoke in low tones. "It's done," she whispered. "He's out. I'll talk to the nurse tomorrow about dosing the 4. Then we move the assets. He won't wake up in time." My fingers twitched. But I kept them still. The machines beeped steadily in the background, rhythmic, artificial, a lullaby for the dead. I lay there in that white, too clean room, my eyes closed, face still. If she had checked my pulse, she would have felt the steady beat of someone very much alive, and very aware. Grant had warned me, it won't be easy. You'll hear things you're not ready for. He was right. The next morning, Nurse Madison wheeled in my breakfast, oatmeal, juice, and supplements, all pre-approved, all untouched. She was part of the plan. My silent guardian. Her job was to ensure no foreign substance made it into my system. Julia, for all her sweet smiles, wasn't fooling anyone here. That day, she returned. Dressed immaculately. Designer shoes, gold studs in her ears, not a single hair out of place. She wept at the door for show, again, then stepped in like she owned the room. The minute she thought no one was watching, she pulled out her phone. "He looks the same," she whispered. "No movement. I'll try again tomorrow." "The nurse, the redhead, she's soft. I think she'll play along for the right price." I felt the rage crawl up my throat, but I kept my breathing steady. After she left, Nurse Madison turned on the white noise machine and leaned in. "She tried to slip something into the tea," she murmured. "Didn't get the chance. I swapped the cups before she arrived. We're safe, for now." I wanted to open my eyes and thank her, but I couldn't break the act. Not yet. Later that day, Dr. Grant brought in a man who didn't wear a lab coat. Detective Connor Hayes. Former cop. Now private. Wore a cheap suit, expensive shoes, the kind of man who paid attention to patterns, not packaging. "Your girl's got a routine," he said, flipping through photos. Phone calls outside the clinic. Meetings with a man, same guy, dark coat, tinted windows. And a lawyer. "She's not grieving, she's preparing. You weren't just a fiancé. You were a bank account." He slid over a photo. Julia, laughing. Her hand on the arm of a man who was not me. Champagne glasses clinking. A private restaurant I'd never seen her visit. "She's already moved some of your shares into a trust under her name," Connor said. "But the transfer stalled. She needs your signature. Or your death certificate." God. I thought it would hurt. That betrayal would rip me apart. But all I felt was clarity. She didn't love me. She loved what I represented. That night, after everyone left, Dr. Grant came back. But he wasn't alone. "Thought you might want to see an old friend," he said, opening the door. In walked a woman in surgical scrubs. Dark hair pulled back. Steady hands. "Claire," I whispered before I could stop myself. "My childhood friend. Now a surgeon in this very clinic." Her eyes widened. "You're not comatose." "Shut the door," I said. She did. Claire stood there in stunned silence, her hand still resting on the door handle. I could see it in her face, the swirl of disbelief, concern, and that flicker of something I hadn't seen since we were teenagers hiding out under the summer stars. "You're awake," she whispered. This was all a setup?" "Not a setup," I corrected, sitting up for the first time in days. "A test." She crossed her arms, voice sharpening with old familiarity. "That sounds like something your grandfather would have come up with." It was. I told her everything, the note, Julia's calls, the poisoning attempt, and the lawyer lurking behind the scenes. Claire didn't interrupt once. She just listened the way only someone who's known your broken pieces can. When I was done, she exhaled and sat beside me on the hospital bed. "I can't believe you were going to go through with the wedding," she murmured. I wanted to believe in her, I admitted. "But I always trusted you more." Claire didn't respond to that, but something shifted in her eyes. Over the next few days, she became my anchor. She'd stop by after surgeries, bringing food she cooked herself, nothing extravagant, just warm and real. She insisted on being part of the team watching Julia. She saw through people faster than anyone. "Med school trains you to spot a lie in 5 seconds flat," she'd say with a smirk. One night, we stayed in the hospital lounge until nearly midnight, eating takeout and laughing like we used to. The warmth between us was quiet but unmistakable. Meanwhile, Detective Hayes kept building the case. More photos. Voice recordings. Documents Julia had signed in preparation for my end-of-life arrangements. She wasn't just preparing for my death, she was orchestrating it. On a rainy Thursday, I called Julia in. In the ward, with the monitors still softly beeping, I lay in bed, eyes open this time, alert. Claire stood beside me in scrubs, her arms crossed. Dr. Grant sat quietly in the corner. The detective stood in the doorway, blocking the exit. Julia walked in and froze. "Surprised to see me?" I asked, my voice cold and measured. She opened her mouth, closed it, then smiled. I thought you were dead? In a coma? Easy to get rid of?" She glanced around, but no one moved. Her facade began to crack. "I loved you," she said, and for the first time, it sounded like a lie she believed. "No," I said. "You loved what came with me. The assets. The control. The name." Then I laid it all out. The photos. The recordings. The planned injections. The lawyer. She turned pale. But instead of screaming or crying, she did something unexpected. She laughed, low and bitter. "You want to talk betrayal?" she spat. "Your stepfather abandoned my mother when she was pregnant. That child, me, never got a name, never got justice. I didn't come to steal. I came to take what should have always been mine." Silence stretched. "Your mother was the one with the grudge," I said carefully. "But you turned it into something darker. Revenge." Julia straightened her spine. "I wanted justice." "Justice doesn't come through murder," I replied. She expected rage. Instead, she got resolution. "You'll get your legal share," I said. "What you're owed by law, not by blood. But that's all. I'm keeping control. And if you ever try anything like this again, we'll go to court, and you'll lose everything." She looked at me one last time, eyes glassy and unreadable. Then she walked out. Life moved strangely after Julia walked out. The ward returned to silence, but something in me had shifted. Not just a sense of victory, but the beginning of something more sobering. The end of illusion. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was tired. Grant filed the necessary documents to ensure Julia's legal rights were formalized, no more, no less. The trust would be adjusted, her lawyer contacted, the shares frozen pending a proper legal division. A clean severance. No revenge. Just control reclaimed. Claire stayed close through it all. She didn't ask for anything, didn't try to fill the empty space Julia left behind. She just stayed. And somehow that meant everything. A few weeks passed. I resumed work, albeit remotely. Estate affairs piled up, and the board was pressing for visibility. But one evening, as I reviewed documents in the clinic's lounge, the call came. "Dr. Grant," the ER nurse's voice crackled over the speaker, "incoming trauma case, male, mid-50s, stab wound to the abdomen, possible blood loss complications. AB negative needed immediately. No donor match on file." Dr. Grant looked at me. "That's your type. AB negative. Rare. Uncommon in the general population. But a genetic trace in my family. I'll donate," I said immediately, standing. They tried to talk me out of it, something about not needing to risk the heir of a fortune. But I insisted. Sometimes you do things not because they're strategic, but because they're human. In the OR hallway, Claire held my hand as the needle slid in. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said enough. There was trust now. Quiet, patient trust. Later, I visited the man I saved. He was sleeping, bandaged and pale, but alive. The nurse said he'd been brought in after being found behind a dumpster, mugged, possibly attacked, no ID. Just a worn coat and the word Jacob stitched into the lining. I didn't recognize him. But something about his face, the shape of his jaw, the familiar tiredness in his eyes when he finally woke, it felt like déjà vu. He blinked up at me. You're the donor, he rasped. I am. He looked away, tears edging the corners of his eyes. I don't deserve it. Why do you say that? He paused. Then, after a long silence, he said. Because I once left behind a son who had this blood type. I saw him once, from a distance, years ago. He had his mother's eyes. My mother made her keep it a secret. I was in prison. When I got out, it was too late. She had remarried. Told him someone else was his father. I never got to tell him. I stared at him. My chest felt tight. Cold. Then hot. Your name, I said slowly, what is it? He looked at me, confused. Jacob. Jacob Madsen. Dr. Grant's voice broke the moment. He'd just entered the room, holding a folder. We ran the DNA test, as you requested. Just got the results. I turned to him. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The nod was enough. Jacob Madsen. I repeated the name in my head as if saying it often enough would make it familiar. But it didn't. It sat heavy in the air, a ghost dragged into the present. He was my father. Not the man who raised me, not the one whose cold shadow had shaped my childhood. But the man who vanished before I had a name. Claire stood beside me when I got the confirmation. She didn't ask questions. She just touched my arm and said, "You don't have to figure it all out tonight." But how do you begin to untangle a lifetime of silence? The next morning, I returned to Jacob's room. He was propped up, sipping water, the color slowly returning to his face. He gave a weak smile when I entered, unaware of what I knew. I closed the door behind me and pulled up a chair. You told me you had a son, I said gently. He looked away. Yes. Did you ever find out what happened to him? He shook his head. His mother wouldn't let me near. After prison, I tried to reach out, but she said it was better this way. That he had a new father. I wasn't allowed near him. I hesitated. Then spoke the words I never thought I'd say. That son is me. He turned sharply, eyes widening. What? My mother, her name was Elise. His mouth dropped open. Elise Turner? I nodded. His hands trembled. God. She told me she moved away. That she changed your name. She did. I grew up under another man's last name. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't kind either. Jacob leaned forward, his voice cracking. I didn't leave because I didn't want you. I was in prison, stupid and angry. By the time I got out, the world had moved on. She moved on. He wept, no pretense, no excuses, just raw regret. I used to come to the city once a year. Just to see your name on a mailbox. I didn't know who you'd become. Never imagined. You don't have to, I said quietly. I didn't come here for apologies. Then why? I paused. I don't know. But when I gave you my blood, something in me said it mattered. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. I thought I'd die without anyone even knowing I existed. I sat beside him for a long time. No words. Just the quiet sound of the monitor tracking his heartbeat. That steady, stubborn rhythm that matched my own. Eventually, Claire came in to check on us. She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened when she saw us sitting there, not as strangers, but as something closer to family. Over the next few days, I arranged for Jacob to be transferred to the country house. It was a place my grandfather had bought but never used much. Peaceful. Private. Safe. Why are you doing this for me? Jacob asked as we packed his things. I looked at him. Because I don't believe people should die being known only for their worst mistakes. He cried again, silently this time. And when we drove out to the countryside, I brought one more thing with us, a small puppy Claire had rescued from a storm drain near the clinic. A shivering mutt with sad eyes and a stubborn will to live. I handed it to Jacob as we arrived. "What's this?" he asked. "A second chance," I said. The country house sat on the edge of a forgotten meadow, where the air always seemed still and the trees whispered secrets in the wind. My grandfather had built it during his final years, a retreat he rarely used, tucked away from business and bloodlines. Now, it would serve a different purpose. Jacob stood on the porch, staring out over the foggy hills, the rescued puppy curled asleep on his feet. He looked out of place there, a man shaped by hard years, long shadows, and solitude. But there was something healing in that silence. We didn't speak much those first few days. He settled into the guest room. I stocked the fridge and taught him how to use the old wood stove. He didn't ask for more than I gave. Maybe he was afraid to. Claire visited often. She said it was to check on the puppy's leg, but I could see her watching the two of us, measuring something in her own quiet way. The three of us would sometimes sit on the porch at night, wrapped in blankets, passing around mugs of strong tea. One night, Jacob asked me, "Do you ever visit your mother's grave?" I nodded slowly. "Haven't gone in years. Felt like I didn't have the right." "You always did," he said. "Even when you didn't know who you were." The next morning, we drove into the city. The cemetery hadn't changed. Still quiet. Still clean. My mother's stone sat between two old oak trees. Her name carved into white marble. No photos. Just the date. No mention of a son or a husband. Just her. Jacob knelt beside her, took off his hat. "I should have come sooner," he whispered. "You did what you thought was best. I hated you for it. I hated myself more." He didn't cry, but his voice cracked in ways that said more than tears ever could. I placed a hand on his shoulder. We stood in silence for a while, two men bound by a woman we'd both lost, one by death, the other by life. Later, we visited my grandfather's grave, the man who raised me with cold hands and a stricter love. Jacob had never met him. "He kept your secret," I told Jacob. "Even on his deathbed. Maybe that was his way of protecting me. Or maybe he wanted to give you a chance to decide who you wanted to be before you learned where you came from," Jacob said. That night, we lit a fire in the country house. The puppy, now named Scout, slept curled in Jacob's lap. Claire had brought over a casserole and a bottle of wine. The four of us, man, son, woman, dog, felt oddly like a family. "Do you think people can rebuild from scratch?" Jacob asked as the flames cracked. Claire looked at him. "Only if they stop pretending the past didn't happen." I thought about Julia. About the coma. About the betrayal and the sting that had dulled to numbness. "I don't want to rebuild," I said finally. "I want to build something new." Jacob nodded. "I'd like to help, if you'll let me." I raised my glass. "Then we start here." The world didn't stop for me to heal. The estate still needed management. The business still buzzed with meetings and deals. But something had changed, and it wasn't just the betrayal behind me. It was the choice I made to walk back into my life with eyes wide open. Claire stood by me the whole time. She came back to the city for good, accepting a full-time surgical position at the clinic. It meant late nights and high stress, but she said the decision was easy. "There's work that keeps you busy," she told me, "and work that makes you whole." We started seeing each other, not in a dramatic, candlelit way, but in the quiet rhythms of two people who already knew each other's past and still chose to stay. Walks through the park after long days. Movie nights that turned into soft laughter and early mornings. She saw the cracks in me and didn't try to fill them, just sat with me while I learned to live with them. Jacob found his place too. He wasn't the lost man anymore. We gave him a job, a simple one, handling supplies for the clinic and making deliveries to partner charities. He wore his new role like armor, and for the first time, he stood upright when he entered a room. The staff liked him. They didn't know his full story, just that he was reliable, always early, and treated everyone like they mattered. Sometimes I caught him watching the clinic halls with a far-off look, like he was trying to rewrite his own history one delivery at a time. He never asked for money. Never brought up the past. He just showed up. Every day. One afternoon, Claire and I walked Scout through the park near the clinic. A little girl ran up to us and asked to pet the puppy. Claire crouched down beside her and smiled, asking her name. Her mother stood nearby, watching us carefully. Then her eyes flicked to me, and recognition bloomed. "You're the man from the story," she said. I tensed. "What story?" "The one about the bride. The coma. It was all over that podcast last month. Someone leaked the case. They said you pretended to be in a coma to expose your fiancé." I swallowed. She didn't look angry. Just curious. "Was it true?" I looked at Claire. She gave me a tiny nod. "It was true," I said quietly. The woman's face changed. Not with judgment, with something close to admiration. "Good," she said. "It's about time someone chose truth over comfort." She walked away. Claire looked at me. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. It just reminded me, everything we went through was real. Not just a test. A war. "And you didn't lose," she said. I thought about that. No. I didn't lose. I learned what I needed to see. The house was quiet the night I proposed. We weren't dressed up, there were no candles, no audience, no dramatic speeches. Just me, Claire, Scout asleep at our feet, and the kind of silence that feels like peace. I held the ring between us, simple, vintage, something I found in a second-hand jeweler's tucked between an old cafe and a bookstore. It wasn't flashy. But it was perfect. "I don't want a ceremony for show," I said. "I don't want a performance. I just want you. Us. Real." Claire looked at the ring, then at me. "You always did things the hard way." "I know," I said, grinning. She took the ring without hesitation. "When?" she asked. "Whenever feels right." It turned out, whenever was 2 weeks later, in the country house. Jacob was there, freshly shaven and wearing a pressed white shirt that made him look like a man who had never slept on a street corner. Dr. Grant came too, in his usual tie that never quite matched his shirt. Claire's sister flew in with her baby. A few friends. A simple meal. Laughter. The scent of pine and firewood and something fresh in the air. Claire wore a dress she already owned. I wore a suit my grandfather had once gifted me. We exchanged vows under the porch awning, the puppy curled on a blanket, the wind humming like a forgotten hymn. There were no photographers, no fancy first dances, no media to report it. But in the middle of the vows, when she smiled at me like I was the only man who ever mattered, I realized it was the most sacred moment of my life. After dinner, Jacob stood up to make a toast. He looked around nervously, holding a glass that trembled slightly in his scarred hand. "I'm not a man of big words," he began, "and I've made more mistakes than most. But tonight, watching my son stand beside the woman he loves, I feel like I got a piece of my life back." He turned to me. "I missed everything. First steps. First fights. First heartbreak. But if I can be here for your new beginning, maybe I didn't miss it all." There wasn't a dry eye at the table. Later that night, when the fire had dwindled to coals and the guests had drifted off to bed, Claire and I sat together in the quiet. I placed a hand on her stomach, a simple, silent gesture that had recently gained new meaning. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "It's early," she whispered. I nodded. "But real," I said. She smiled. "Just like everything else we've built." Fall settled in with a hush, the kind that blankets the world in golden stillness. Leaves crunched underfoot. The clinic bustled with colder weather cases. Claire was starting to show, a small, delicate curve that made her glow in ways I'd never seen before. The world hadn't changed. But I had. So had Jacob. He had become something of a quiet legend at the clinic, the guy who knew everyone's coffee order, who fixed the leaky faucet before anyone noticed it was broken, who never missed a shift. Most people still didn't know he was my father. It didn't matter. We had nothing to prove anymore. One afternoon, we visited the graves again. This time together. My mother's first. Jacob knelt, cleaned the stone carefully. Left a small bouquet of wildflowers, not store-bought. Picked himself. He whispered something I didn't try to overhear. Some things are meant to pass only between the living and the gone. Then we went to my grandfather's. I hadn't been back since the coma. I'd been angry. Confused. His final test had felt like a burden at first. But now, I saw it clearly. He hadn't been cruel. Just precise. Cold when he needed to be. Strategic always. He didn't give me warmth, but he gave me tools. Tools I used to survive betrayal, deception, and my own blindness. I knelt before the headstone, fingers brushing over the engraved quote, "Build on rock, not sand." I understood now. I whispered, "Thank you," then stood. Before we left, I took out a folded paper from my coat. A legal document, the final trust adjustment. Julia had received her share. A clean exit. Nothing more. I left a copy on the grave. Not out of spite. Out of closure. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. As we walked back to the car, Scout bounded ahead. Claire looped her arm through mine. "You're quiet," she said. "Thinking." "About what?" I looked at her, then at the horizon beyond the trees. "About how strange it is that a coma, a fake one, no less, woke me up." She smiled. "Sometimes you have to lie still long enough to hear the truth." At home, Jacob grilled dinner while Claire and I sat on the back porch. The wind carried the smell of smoke and rosemary. Inside, a tiny crib had already been delivered and assembled. No name picked yet. No theme. Just a soft gray blanket folded over the side, and a tiny onesie that said, "Hello, world." I watched Claire rub her belly and realized how far I had come, from a man afraid of shadows to a man who had walked through them. The morning our son was born, the sky was pouring. Not a soft, poetic drizzle, a full-blown, sky-cracking storm. The kind that rattles windows and stirs old ghosts. I drove Claire to the hospital through flooded streets, one hand gripping hers, the other clenched on the wheel. Scout whined from the back seat, sensing something momentous. The labor was long. Claire was stronger. And when the baby's cry finally broke through the sterile quiet of the delivery room, something inside me gave way, a quiet, aching rupture. I didn't cry. I just stood there, stunned, as if I'd seen the beginning of the world for the very first time. He was perfect. Red-faced and angry at the air, fists clenched like he already had something to prove. When the nurse placed him in Claire's arms, she looked up at me. His name? We'd talked about it before, names from both sides of the family, strong names, gentle names. But in that moment, none of them fit. I looked down at this tiny life that had survived heartbreak, deception, and bloodlines he'd never understand. A child who'd never know secrets the way I had. "I want to name him after no one," I said. Claire blinked. "I want his name to be new. Clean. No expectations. No legacy. Just his. She smiled, the kind of smile that rewrites everything. And so we gave him a new name. One no man in either bloodline had ever carried. A name that would carry him forward, not weigh him down. Jacob came to visit a few hours later. He held his grandson like he was made of light. "I never thought I'd hold another chance in my arms," he whispered. "But here he is." I didn't say anything. I just watched the way his weathered hands cradled something so fragile. Back at the country house, we framed a photo from that day, the four of us, Claire, the baby, Jacob, and me. Scout lying at our feet. A fire in the background. A real family. No performance. No inheritance of pain. Just choice. Love. Tested. Proven. The past didn't disappear. But it stopped steering the wheel. Sometimes people ask me why I went through with it, the coma, the deception, the layers of observation. And I tell them the truth. Because you can't build a future unless you're willing to test the foundation. Because betrayal taught me to listen harder, see clearer, love better. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. And because justice, when served without vengeance, makes room for something much stronger. Peace.